Chapter 96. The Contract. 3 days after the scene we have just described, namely towards 5 o'clock in the afternoon of the day fixed for the signature of the contract between Mademoiselle Eugenie Danglars and Andrea Cavalcanti, whom the banker persisted in calling Prince, as a fresh breeze agitated all the leaves in the little garden situated in front of the Count of Monte Cristo's house, and the latter was preparing to go out, while his horses were impatiently pawing the ground, held in by the coachman, who had been seated by a quarter of an hour on his box, the elegant phaeton with which we are familiar rapidly turned the angle of the entrance gate, and threw, rather than set down, on the steps of the door, Monsieur Andrea Cavalcanti, as much decked and as gay as if he, on his side, was going to marry a princess. He inquired after the Count with his usual familiarity, and bounding lightly to the first story, met him on the top of the stairs. The Count stopped on seeing the young man. As for Andrea, he was launched, and when once launched, nothing stopped him. "Ah, good morning, my dear Count," said he. "Ah, Monsieur Andrea," said the latter, with his half-jesting tone. "How do you do?" "Charmingly, as you see. I am come to talk to you about 1,000 things. But first tell me, were you going out or just returned?" "I was going out, sir." "Then, in order not to hinder you, I will get up with you, if you please, in your carriage, and Tom shall follow with my phaeton in tow." "No," said the Count, with an imperceptible smile of contempt, for he had no wish to be seen in the young man's society. "No, I prefer listening to you here, my dear Monsieur Andrea. We can chat better indoors, and there is no coachman to overhear our conversation." The Count returned to a small drawing-room on the first floor, sat down, and crossing his legs, motioned to the young man to take a seat also. Andrea assumed his gayest manner. "You know, my dear Count," said he, "the ceremony is to take place this evening. At 9 o'clock the contract is to be signed at my father-in-law's." "Ah, indeed?" said Monte Cristo. "What, is it news to you? Has not Monsieur Danglars apprised you of the solemnity?" "Oh, yes," said the Count. "I received a letter from him yesterday, but I do not think the hour was mentioned." "Possibly. My father-in-law trusted to its general notoriety." "Well," said Monte Cristo, "you are fortunate, Monsieur Cavalcanti. It is a most suitable alliance you are contracting, and Mademoiselle Danglars is a pretty girl." "Yes, indeed she is," replied Cavalcanti with a very modest tone. "Above all, she is very rich. At least, I believe so," said Monte Cristo. "Very rich, do you think?" replied the young man. "Doubtless. It is said Monsieur Danglars conceals at least half of his fortune." "And he acknowledges 15 or 20 millions," said Andrea, with a look sparkling with joy. "Without reckoning," added Monte Cristo, "that he is on the eve of entering into a sort of speculation already in vogue in the United States and in England, but quite novel in France." "Yes, yes, I know what you allude to. The railway, of which he has obtained the grant, is it not?" "Precisely. It is generally believed that he will gain 10 millions by that affair." "10 millions? Do you think so? It is magnificent," said Cavalcanti, who was quite confounded at the metallic sound of these golden words. "Without reckoning," replied Monte Cristo, "that all his fortune will come to you, and justly too, since Mademoiselle Danglars is an only daughter. Besides, your own fortune, as your father assured me, is almost equal to that of your betrothed. But enough of money matters. Do you know, Monsieur Andrea, I think you have managed this affair rather skillfully." "Not badly, by any means," said the young man. "I was born for a diplomatist." "Well, you must become a diplomatist. It is a knowledge not to be acquired, you know. It is instinctive. Have you lost your heart?" "Indeed, I fear it," replied Andrea, in the tone in which he had heard Durant or Valère reply to Alceste in the Théâtre Français. "Is your love returned?" "I suppose so," said Andrea, with a triumphant smile, "since I am accepted. But I must not forget one grand point." "Which?" "That I have been singularly assisted." "Nonsense!" "I have indeed." "By circumstances?" "No, by you." "By me?" "Not at all, Prince," said Monte Cristo, laying a marked stress on that title. "What have I done for you? Are not your name, your social position, and your merit sufficient?" No, said Andrea. No, it is useless for you to say so, Count. I maintain that the position of a man like you has done more than my name, my social position, and my merit. You are completely mistaken, sir, said Monte Cristo coldly, who felt the perfidious maneuver of the young man and understood the bearing of his words. You only acquired my protection after the influence and fortune of your father had been ascertained. For, after all, who procured for me, who have never seen either you or your illustrious father, the pleasure of your acquaintance? Two of my good friends, Lord Wilmore and the Abbé Busoni, who encouraged me not to become your surety, but to patronize you? It was your father's name, so well known in Italy and so highly honored. Personally, I do not know you. This calm tone and perfect ease made Andrea feel he was, for the moment, restrained by a more muscular hand than his own, and that the restraint could not be easily broken through. Oh, then my father has really a very large fortune, Count? It appears so, sir, replied Monte Cristo. Do you know if my promised dowry is come? I have been advised of it. But the 3 millions? The 3 millions are probably on the road. Then I shall readily have them? Forsooth, said the Count, I do not think you have yet known the want of money. Andrea was so surprised he reflected for a moment. Then, arousing from his reverie, Now, sir, I have one request to make to you, which you will understand, even if it should be disagreeable to you. Proceed, said Monte Cristo. I have formed an acquaintance, thanks to my good fortune, with many noted persons, and have, at least for the moment, a crowd of friends. But marrying, as I am about to do, before all Paris, I ought to be supported by an illustrious name, and in the absence of the paternal hand, some powerful one ought to lead me to the altar. Now my father is not coming to Paris, is he? He is old, covered with wounds, and suffers dreadfully, he says, in traveling. Indeed? Well, I am come to ask a favor of you. Of me? Yes, of you. And pray what may it be? Well, to take his part. Ah, my dear sir, what? After the numerous relations I have had the happiness to sustain towards you, you know me so little as to ask such a thing? Ask me to lend you 500,000, and although such a loan is somewhat rare, on my honor you would annoy me less. Know, then, what I thought I had already told you, that, in its moral participation, particularly with this world's affairs, the Count of Monte Cristo has never ceased to entertain the scruples and even the superstitions of the East. I, who have a seraglio at Cairo, one at Smyrna, and one at Constantinople, preside at a wedding? Never. Then you refuse me? Decidedly. And were you my son or my brother, I would refuse you in the same way. But what must be done? Said Andrea, disappointed. You said just now you had 100 friends. Agreed, but you introduced me at Monsieur Danglars. Not at all. Let us recall the exact facts. You met him at a dinner party at my house, and you introduced yourself at his house. That is a totally different affair. Yes, but my marriage, you have forwarded that. I? Not in the least, I beg you to believe. Recollect what I told you when you asked me to propose you. Oh, I never make matches, my dear prince. It is my settled principle. Andrea bit his lips. But at least you will be there. Will all Paris be there? Oh, certainly. Well, like all Paris, I shall be there too, said the Count. And will you sign the contract? I see no objection to that. My scruples do not go thus far. Well, since you will grant me no more, I must be content with what you give me. But one word more, Count. What is it? Advice. Be careful. Advice is worse than a service. Oh, you can give me this without compromising yourself. Tell me what it is. Is my wife's fortune 500,000 livres? That is the sum Monsieur Danglars himself announced. Must I receive it, or leave it in the hands of the notary? This is the way such affairs are generally arranged when it is wished to do them stylishly. Your two solicitors appoint a meeting when the contract is signed, for the next day or the following. Then they exchange the two portions, for which they each give a receipt. Then, when the marriage is celebrated, they place the amount at your disposal as chief of the community. Because, said Andrea, with a certain ill-concealed uneasiness, I thought I heard my father-in-law say he intended embarking our property in that famous railway affair of which you spoke just now. "Well," replied Monte Cristo, "it will be the way, everybody says, of tripling your fortune in 12 months. The Baron Danglars is a good father and knows how to calculate." "Come, then," said Andrea, "all is well, excepting your refusal, which quite grieves me. You must attribute it only to natural scruples under similar circumstances." "Well," said Andrea, "let it be as you wish. This evening, then, at 9 o'clock." "Adieu till then." Notwithstanding a slight resistance on the part of Monte Cristo, whose lips turned pale, but who preserved his ceremonious smile, Andrea seized the Count's hand, pressed it, jumped into his phaeton, and disappeared. The 4 or 5 remaining hours before 9 o'clock arrived, Andrea employed in riding, paying visits destined to interest those of whom he had spoken, to appear at the bankers in the gayest equipages, dazzling them by promises of grand feasts, which have since turned every brain, and in which Danglars was just becoming initiated. In fact, at 8:30 in the evening, the grand saloon, the gallery adjoining, and the 3 other drawing-rooms on the same floor were filled with a perfumed crowd, who sympathized but little in the event, but who all participated in that love of being present wherever there is anything fresh to be seen. An academician would say that soirees of the world are collections of flowers which attract inconstant butterflies, famished bees, and buzzing drones. No one could dispute that the rooms were splendidly illuminated. The light streamed forth on the gold mouldings and the silk hangings, and all the bad taste of this furniture, which had only its richness to boast of, shone in its splendor. Mademoiselle Eugénie was dressed with elegant simplicity. A figured white silk dress, a white rose half concealed in her jet-black hair, were her only ornaments, unaccompanied by a single jewel. Her eyes, however, betrayed that perfect confidence which contradicted the girlish simplicity of this modest attire. Madame Danglars was chatting at a short distance with Debray, Beauchamp, and Château Renaud. Debray was admitted to the house for this grand solemnity, but like everyone else, and without any particular privilege. Monsieur Danglars, surrounded by deputies and men connected with the revenue, was explaining a new theory of taxation which he intended to adopt when the course of events had compelled government to call him into the ministry. Andrea, on whose arm hung one of the most consummate dandies of the opera, was explaining to him rather cleverly, since he was obliged to be bold to appear at ease, his future projects and the new luxuries he meant to introduce to Parisian fashions with his 175,000 livres per annum. The crowd moved to and fro in those rooms like an ebb and flow of turquoises, rubies and emeralds, opals and diamonds. As usual, the oldest women were the most decorated, and the ugliest the most conspicuous. If there was a beautiful lily or a sweet rose, you had to search for it, concealed in some corner behind a mother with a turban or an aunt with a bird of paradise. At each moment, in the midst of the crowd, the buzzing and the laughter, the doorkeeper's voice was heard announcing some name well known in the financial department, respected in the army, or illustrious in the literary world, and which was acknowledged by a slight movement in the different groups. But for one whose privilege it was to agitate that ocean of human waves, how many were received with a look of indifference or a sneer of disdain? At the moment when the hand of the massive timepiece, representing Endymion asleep, pointed to 9 on its golden face, and the hammer, the faithful type of mechanical thought, struck 9 times, the name of Count de Monte Cristo resounded in its turn, and as if by an electric shock, all the assembly turned towards the door. The Count was dressed in black, and with his habitual simplicity. His white waistcoat displayed his expansive noble chest. His black stock appeared singularly remarkable, contrasting as it did with the deadly paleness of his face. His only jewel was a chain so fine that the slender gold thread was scarcely perceptible on his white waistcoat. A circle was formed immediately round the door. The Count perceived at one glance Madame Danglars at one end of the drawing-room, Monsieur Danglars at the other, and Eugénie in front of him. He first advanced towards the Baroness, who was chatting with Madame Villefort, who had come alone, Valentine being still an invalid, and without turning aside, so clear was the road left for him, he passed from the Baroness to Eugénie, whom he complimented in such rapid and measured terms that the proud artist was quite struck. Near her was Mademoiselle Louise d'Armilly, who thanked the Count for the letters of introduction he had so kindly given her for Italy, which she intended immediately to make use of. On leaving these ladies, he found himself with Danglars, who had advanced to meet him. Having accomplished these 3 social duties, Monte Cristo stopped, looking round him with that expression peculiar to a certain class, which seems to say, "I have done my duty, now let others do theirs." Andrea, who was in an adjoining room, had shared in the sensation caused by the arrival of Monte Cristo, and now came forward to pay his respects to the Count. He found him completely surrounded. All were eager to speak to him, as is always the case with those whose words are few and weighty. The solicitors arrived at this moment, and arranged their scrawled papers on the velvet cloth embroidered with gold which covered the table prepared for the signature. It was a gilt table supported on lions' claws. One of the notaries sat down, the others remained standing. They were about to proceed to the reading of the contract which half Paris assembled was to sign. All took their place, or rather the ladies formed a circle, while the gentlemen, more indifferent as to the place of the style énergique, as Boileau says, commented on the feverish agitation of Andrea, on M. Danglars' riveted attention, Eugenie's composure, and the light and sprightly manner in which the Baroness treated this important affair. The contract was read during a profound silence, but as soon as it finished, the buzz was redoubled through all the drawing-rooms. The brilliant sums, the rolling millions which were to be at the command of the 2 young people, and which crowned the display which had been made in a room entirely appropriated for that purpose of the wedding presents and the young lady's diamonds, had resounded with all their delusion on the jealous assembly. Mademoiselle Danglars' charms were heightened in the opinion of the young men, and for the moment seemed to outvie the sun in splendor. As for the ladies, it is needless to say that, while jealous of these millions, they thought they did not require them to render them beautiful. Andrea, surrounded by his friends, complimented, flattered, beginning to believe in the reality of his dream, was almost bewildered. The notary solemnly took the pen, flourished it above his head, and said, "Gentlemen, the contract is to be signed." The Baron was to sign first, then the representative of Monsieur Cavalcanti Senior, then the Baroness, afterwards the future couple, as they are styled on the ceremonious stamped papers. The Baron took the pen and signed, then the representative. The Baroness approached, leaning on Madame de Villefort's arm. "My dear," said she, as she took the pen, "is it not vexatious? An unexpected incident in the affair of the murder and theft at the Count of Monte Cristo's, in which he nearly fell a victim, deprives us of the pleasure of seeing Monsieur de Villefort." "Indeed," said Monsieur Danglars, in the same tone in which he would have said, "Faith, I care very little about it." "Indeed," said Monte Cristo, approaching, "I am much afraid I am the involuntary cause of that absence." "What? You, Count?" said Madame Danglars, signing. "If you are, take care, I shall never forgive you." Andrea pricked up his ears. "But it is not my fault, as I shall endeavor to prove." Everyone listened eagerly. Monte Cristo, who so rarely opened his lips, was about to speak. "You remember," said the Count, during the most profound silence, "that the unhappy wretch who came to rob me died at my house. It was supposed he was stabbed by his accomplice on attempting to leave it." "Yes," said Danglars. "In order to examine his wounds he was undressed, and his clothes were thrown into a corner where officers of justice picked them up with the exception of the waistcoat, which they overlooked." Andrea turned pale and drew towards the door. He saw a cloud rising in the horizon, which appeared to forebode a coming storm. "Well, this waistcoat was discovered today, covered with blood, and with a hole over the heart." The ladies screamed, and 2 or 3 prepared to faint. "It was brought to me. No one could guess what the dirty rag could be. I alone supposed it was the waistcoat of the victim. My valet, in examining this mournful relic, felt a paper in the pocket and drew it out. It was a letter addressed to you, Baron." "To me?" cried Danglars. "Yes, indeed to you. I succeeded in deciphering your name under the blood with which the letter was stained," replied Monte Cristo, amid the general burst of amazement. "But," asked Madame Danglars, looking at her husband with uneasiness, "how could that prevent Monsieur de Villefort—" "In this simple way, madame," replied Monte Cristo. "The waistcoat and the letter were both what is termed convictive evidence. I therefore sent it all to Monsieur le Crown Prosecutor. You understand, my dear Baron, legal proceedings are the safest in criminal cases. It was perhaps some plot against you." Andrea looked steadily at Monte Cristo and disappeared in the second drawing-room. "Possibly," said Danglars. "Was not this murdered man an old galley slave?" "Yes," replied the count, "a felon named Caderousse." Danglars turned slightly pale. Andrea reached the anteroom beyond the little drawing-room. "But go on signing," said Monte Cristo. "I perceive my story has caused a general emotion, and I beg to apologize to you, Baroness, and to Mademoiselle Danglars." The Baroness, who had signed, returned the pen to the notary. "Prince Cavalcanti," said the latter. "Prince Cavalcanti, where are you?" "Andrea! Andrea!" repeated several young people, who were already on sufficiently intimate terms with him to call him by his Christian name. "Call the prince. Inform him it is his turn to sign," cried Danglars to one of the doorkeepers. But at the same instant the crowd of guests rushed terrified into the principal saloon, as if some frightful monster had entered the apartments, querens quem devoret, a Latin phrase which means looking for someone to devour. There was indeed reason to retreat, to be alarmed, and to scream. An officer was placing 2 soldiers at the door of each drawing-room, and was advancing towards Danglars, preceded by a commissioner of police girded with his scarf. Madame Danglars uttered a scream and fainted. Danglars, who thought himself threatened— certain consciences are never calm— Danglars appeared before his guests with a terrified countenance. "What is the matter, sir?" asked Monte Cristo, advancing to meet the commissioner. "Which of you gentlemen," asked the magistrate, without replying to the count, "answers to the name of Andrea Cavalcanti?" A cry of stupor was heard from all parts of the room. They searched, they questioned. "But who then is Andrea Cavalcanti?" asked Danglars in amazement. "A galley slave who escaped from confinement at Toulon." "And what crime has he committed?" "He is accused," said the commissary, with his inflexible voice, "of having assassinated the man named Caderousse, his former companion in prison, at the moment he was making his escape from the house of the Count of Monte Cristo." Monte Cristo cast a rapid glance around. Andrea was gone.